For good people of Los Angeles, welcome to another episode of the Season Pass podcast. I'm Alex Dwyer. I'm here with Ryan Wallerson, Josh Gross. Ryan is on the scene in Florida. It is the morning. I don't think I've ever recorded a podcast in the morning. I hardly ever even use the internet in the mornings. I usually use it to write. But, you know, special circumstances, trying new things. Isn't that 2020 is all about, boys?
That's one way of saying it. Sure. 2020 is all about that. That's right.
We're recording this on Thursday. We had a little technical issues on Wednesday when we were trying to record. So LAFC is already going to be playing against Orlando tomorrow in the quarterfinals of the COVID Cup, the MLS Is Back Tournament. Before we talk about the Orlando game, we are definitely going to cover heavily the 4-1 emphatic round of 16 knockout game between LAFC and the Seattle Sounders. Of course, the Supporter Shield champions and the MLS Cup champions facing off in this Disney wide world of sports. Janky and yet inspiring, and yet also a tournament where I really have to give credit to the protocols that have been in place, especially as we've seen with other sports. In the beginning, when Josh, Ryan, and I started doing this, I was super doubtful that they'd be able to have a tournament all the way. And we're about to get to the quarterfinal stage, and then we'll be in the semis. And I think this thing is actually going to get finished, which is pretty remarkable, given that two teams went home early. So yeah, MLS deserves a lot of credit, and I, for one, have enjoyed now watching these games a lot more. And of course, I think all of us really enjoyed watching the game on Monday. Wait, was it Monday? It was Monday night. Yep. 4-1. Ryan, you were there. You were also there with Josh and I last fall when Seattle knocked off LAFC before a chance for them to host MLS Cup at Banc of California Stadium. It ended up being 3-2 or 3-1, I believe, in that one. And obviously different result, much different feeling. How did this game feel different, actually being there and just the looks of the players, looks of the coaches? Like what was kind of the vibe of this one, Ryan?
Well, I mean, the difference between this game and the last time LAFC faced Seattle in the playoffs last year is definitely that a different team got to play their game. LAFC was reacting to Seattle's efficiency on the counter press. They used instances more so than the entire run of play to kind of hit LAFC multiple times, and LAFC wasn't able to come back in the way we've seen them do so firmly in this tournament. They got left at 3-1 and were never able to close the gap. Reacting to the success that Seattle's game plan was having on them. But this time, LAFC was the team dictating terms of the match. They came out extremely well, by far the best we've seen in the tournament so far, and played a really strong 10 minutes that eventually got rewarded with Diego Rossi's penalty in the 14th. But they honestly could have had 2 or 3 goals from open play before the penalty happened. They came out really strong. And then they found that second goal, late in the first half, Latif Blessing hitting the ball off the Sounders defender. They kept the Sounders on their heels. They kept them in their half of the field. They were defending a lot, reacting a lot, and LAFC were, completing passes, building chances, and they weren't as efficient with their opportunities, all the chances created as you'd like to see, but definitely multiple steps in the right direction and easily the strongest performance we've seen so far.
Josh, we've talked a lot between the three of us and most people in the media, and I think LAFC circles, about the last hurdle for this club, this new club, in becoming a truly great club is winning a knockout competition. At first, the question was whether you could just win those games at all. They've now won games in MLS Cup playoffs. They've won games in CONCACAF Champions League. They've won games in the U.S. Open Cup. This is obviously a different sort of tournament. And this was a different sort of game, but they've progressed. And until they win one of these tournaments, maybe those questions never get answered. But did you feel more convinced that they're on the trajectory to do that, to be there and do what it takes to win these knockout games? How were your assessment of their chances? How did they change given the result on Monday night?
I don't think they changed too much because you expect them to really sort of dictate and not dominate necessarily, but you expect the way that LAFC plays, their talent, their energy to really determine the outcomes of matches. And when they step out and so aggressive from the very, I was remembering that Leon game, when they came back at Bank of California Stadium, just the energy from the opening whistle through 90 minutes. That's a lot of what Seattle felt like until the result looked inevitable. But I think that's LAFC at their best. I mean, Bob Bradley has talked about there's ways to disrupt the opponents and ramping up the speed and playing at a level that they're not used to playing at in terms of their reaction times is one of the weapons that LAFC has. And that was really how Seattle played. So can you do that every game in a tournament? Can you expect that kind of energy every single time? No, probably not, depending on the opponent you play, their style, how you are on the day itself. A lot of factors will determine whether you can actually just get out and run over teams. And it seems like a difficult thing to do. But there's no denying the talent. And again, they're doing this without Carlos Vela, right? And they're doing it without Adamo Diamande now. And they still find ways to score goals, and they still figure out how to do it within their system, within the way they play. And teams have a hard time matching their energy. So when LAFC are that ambitious and that aggressive from the early going, and they're not overrunning on defense, and they're not charging after balls, and they're not too aggressive, they really set themselves up for a lot of success. It's just sustaining it over the course of a tournament. 3 more matches to go, and we'll see. We'll have our answers.
Yeah. There were 2 words that sort of jumped out to me between the post-game press conferences, the pre-game ones, which LAFC had yesterday ahead of Orlando, that sort of really spoke to how they've been, how they were, at least in the Seattle match, and especially the Galaxy match. Again, given all the factors, given no Carlos Vela, and the 2 words that people kept using were dynamic and relentless. I think relentless, of course, was used by Dejan Jakovic to talk about Diego Rossi and his offensive, attacking, creative performances in the tournament. Relentless was also used, I think, to describe Latif Blessing by the broadcasters in the game. And it's just like these dynamic players that LAFC's always sought to bring into the fold from the beginning are now, becoming such a important factor, an important X factor in how they can take teams apart, that it's almost made it more difficult in some ways, according to, I believe, the Seattle broadcaster, Max, our good friend Max Betos, had him on his show after the Seattle match, and the Seattle lead broadcaster was like, it was sort of easier when we knew Carlos Vela was there because we knew we could focus on trying to neutralize Carlos Vela, but now you have more players who can hurt you in more ways. And you obviously saw Mohamed El Munir come in. You saw even a player like Danny Musovski come in, and Latif, who is everywhere in the night. These guys who are they're being dynamic and they're being relentless, and they're doing it in spaces all over the pitch that make it difficult for other teams to plan, but it also makes it difficult on the night as the game evolves, because then they can get into different seams. These players were identified for their dynamism, and it was just a huge thing for me to watch in the Seattle game that it was just so, I was thinking to myself, if I'm Brian Schmetzer, what do I do? What do I do about this? The only thing that you can hope is that your players can match the intensity level. It might be impossible to match the dynamism, but you can match the intensity and hopefully just, get the better of a certain 50-50 chances, or just be there at different times and get on top of the team. But again, after something Ryan had brought up, after this sort of beginning stage, where LAFC really just showed that they weren't going to concede early again and they were going to be on top of the game, it really became evident to me that, the only way Seattle was going to get back into it was by trying to match that relentlessness. And we did see when Jovan Jones came on and the ball he played through, a great goal, a goal that was difficult to defend in some ways and didn't reek of some of the defensive frailties that we've seen earlier in the tournament from LAFC. But right after that, we saw Tristan Blackman head the ball in a very uncontested sort of little moment where he, should have done better for sure, but he heads it. Rui Diaz collects and has a chance to equalize the game very, very quickly after LAFC hadn't been able to score. And of course, Kenneth Vermeer, a player we all thought should get the start for LAFC in the goal, did get the start and he got the save. What does it say about the fact that this game, even though they did concede again, LAFC, even when they made a mistake on defense, were able to sort of clean it up and move on with the game and, of course, go on and kill the game and win? What do you guys think that means? Maybe, Ryan, you can go first.
I definitely was glad to see Kenneth Vermeer in goal to start the match because I thought that was the right decision. And honestly, the save that he makes, it's point blank. The ball falls right to the Seattle attacker, to Rui Diaz. And I thought that he was going to concede right there. I was very close to it. It was on the right side of the field for me to be, not straight up to it, but right off to the right side. And I had a good look at it. And his reactions were excellent. And I thought that, that's the difference between a tie match and, that momentum kind of falling away from LAFC late, or cleaning up and finishing the game as strongly as they started it. And that's exactly what I said they needed to do in the last podcast to win this game. Start and finish the game strong, and they were able to do that. And their finish was definitely the foundation of that strong finish was that save by Vermeer.
Josh, did you find some of those issues that they struggled with against Portland and in other parts of the group stage games, the defensive organization? Did you find players seeming to just be more sharp, like they're this further on to their sort of preseason, so that they weren't making those defensive mistakes or having those lapses in judgment? Because to me, it seemed like apart from those two chances, Seattle just didn't offer a whole lot. And some of that falls in Seattle, but a lot of it went on the fact that LAFC was just competent in the back.
Competent in the back, but I really think their pressure in dictating what the match looks like to Seattle had a lot to do with that. Seattle had some moments towards the end of the first half. There was a stretch where they were maintaining the ball in the LAFC zone and a lot of crosses, a lot of corner opportunities, but nothing ever really felt close. And so I think if LAFC can possess in the midfield and they're getting that counter press and they're getting the ball back and they're never giving a chance to feel like they can develop a rhythm, then every single time their opponent gets the ball, it's like, wow, we get the ball, we have to attack right now. And that's part of Bob's idea, I think, of speeding up the team that they're playing to an uncomfortable level, sort of getting in their minds that they have to hurry, they have to speed up, and that plays into what they want to do on the counter press, and that helps them defensively. Once LAFC starts chasing the ball, a team can possess it, then they get in some trouble, and we've seen them get hurt that way. So when you have a team like LAFC who wants the ball right away, who dictates the control, who can possess it and then get it back, I think that goes a long way to alleviating any sort of long-term defensive problems that they have or organization problems. Didn't see any issues on set pieces. And I think Dejan Jakovic has certainly been a factor in the middle, and his presence there again was certainly the paid off for LAFC over the course of that match.
And you had Dejan starting that first match, if you remember, against Houston, and then this match. In those two matches in the middle, he did not start the Galaxy match and Portland. He came out after the game in the lead up to the Orlando game and said, we're a good defensive team. We showed we are a good defensive team. And of course, we all know, like in Bob Bradley's system, everyone plays defensively. It's not like sometimes people talk about soccer like it's NFL or something, like on the defensive side of the ball and the offensive side of the ball. But in reality, it's like the game's more fluid. Obviously, you have the ball, you're attacking. When you don't have the ball, you're defending. But collectively from front to back, this is a team that defends. And the ways in which they pressure the ball in the offensive third definitely influence and help the whole system operate better. But I thought what Dejan said, that we're a good defensive team, was interesting because he didn't say we're a great defending team. And I don't think that anyone would say that LAFC are a great defensive team. But if you're a good defensive team and you're an excellent attacking team, it's almost enough. And part of me also feels like, looking at Dejan, I can't help but think about Walker Zimmerman, a player that when they sold him at the beginning of this year really came as a shock and almost like litmus test again for the validity of Bob and John's, not only their plan for this club going forward, but their plan for this club on the field now. Because we are all wondering who's going to be the center back pairing. I mean, Walker Zimmerman has been a leadership figure at LAFC now for so long. He was constantly made available to the media. He just the way he had experience in the league and the place he was in his career. I mean, it was Walker Zimmerman and Eddie Segura, and that seemed like the center back pairing that this strong team needed in the back. Obviously, Dejan's been here from the beginning, went out to USL on loan, came back. And, he's managed to make us sort of forget about Walker Zimmerman. He's made us wonder, where was this part of his where is this part of his game earlier in his career? But the most important thing that he said to me, and it sort of really helped me understand things a little bit better in terms of life in the bubble and how LAFC has been in this tournament, is he said, everyone's been taking a leadership role. Everyone's taking a leadership role. When I think about leadership in the locker room, I think sometimes get caught in a top-down sort of leadership style. And when I look at a team like LAFC, who, again, I think I've mentioned on the podcast before, Laurent Simon, Benny Feilhaber, Steven Beitashour, even a Tyler Miller, obviously a Walker Zimmerman, a Lee Win, Jordan Harvey, who's gotten a lot less playing time in this tournament. You think about all these really key leadership or veteran figures, and of course Carlos Vela, the current captain of the team, they're not really part of this picture. Many of them aren't even on the team anymore. How have they been able to do this? Marc-Anthony Kerr is wearing the armband, but he's passing it off to Atuesta. Kenneth Vermeer is new to the team, and yet, he's got a role to play. And the Dejan Jakovic's of the world, these players that have already been here. Bob's spoken to Diego Rossi's leadership abilities, helping him shepherd Bryant. So you're seeing different sorts of leadership all over the field, and it sounds like that's something even the players are recognizing internally. And I wanted to see, you guys have watched this team as long as I have, whether you feel just in general that this team is more confident, across the board, and they're better at, when they do concede, they go back and score right after that. Do you see these sort of less concrete, more abstract, leadership mechanisms working or on display in this tournament when so many traditional leaders aren't there? Ryan, you can hit it.
I think that Marc-Anthony Kaye hit it on the head in the early stages, maybe even before the competition began, when he said that, from veterans to the newest members and youngest members of the team, leadership was going to be needed. And I think that they've played to that tune, and that's been the source of their strength in this tournament, missing all of the traditional sources of leadership that you mentioned. Last year, I think the loss to Seattle was a lesson for the team. They didn't react the best to Seattle's game plan. They didn't react the best to their physicality, and they didn't react the best that they could to the goals that they gave up. But it was a hard lesson to learn and a stepping stone that's led them to this point where they're able to operate so well, missing so many key members. And when those people come back, when, Jordan Harvey's on the field, that traditional source of leadership is there. When Carlos Vela is back, in the center or on the wing in the attack, and the main focal point of defenses, they'll have, that much more leadership to rely on. But the fact that, an Eddie Segura, Francisco Janela, Diego Palacios, Mohamed El Munir, even a Danny Musovski, who's playing his first LAFC minutes, at this tournament, or right down to Bryce Duke, the youngest member of the team. They've all shown well, both individually and collectively as a team. And I think that just as much as LAFC's offensive prowess, the fact that it can, draw leadership from any point, any position, any person on the field is a huge factor to why the team is where they are right now in this tournament as favorites.
I still hope that Christian Torres gets in the games as the real youngest member of LAFC's of class on this tournament. That would be amazing. I was hoping he'd go in at the end of the Seattle game. He didn't get in.
I was watching for it too, and if he had, I'd have mentioned it. But the young man's got to get on the field first.
Yeah. Bob said in the lead up to this one that there's nothing, quote unquote, nothing sophisticated about his system, that it was all about getting the right kinds of players in. In a way, to sort of like link these two things. Well, first of all, is there anything about it that's not sophisticated? Because we've heard 1,000 times how many little things the players are learning from Bob. I think he's being a little bit coy with that, but first of all, if is there anything sophisticated? And in a way, is Bob and the system that he's implemented not the biggest or the most important anchoring leadership quality of this team after all? As personnel comes in, we've seen changes, something we've talked about at the onset of this tournament, this being, another chance for us to see whether his system, despite all changes, can keep going. And just whether or not you think this bigger picture thing Bob's talking about, this non-sophisticated thing and just the right kind of people, is what we're seeing play out on the field.
Yeah. I don't think I'm qualified to say whether it's sophisticated or not. Bob Bradley's football IQ is off the charts, generally speaking, and I mean I'm a novice, and so I do think that there's the intricacies in his system, what he expects as players, the quick decision making, sort of relying on them to understand in the moment to do exactly what you need to do, and you get that on the practice field. So I don't think there's anything unsophisticated about it. I don't know that it's overly sophisticated. I don't think he's really trying to break the model of what good soccer looks like. He's just continually trying to impart the ideas that he's accrued over his many years in the sport and thinks about constantly. I think from a leadership perspective, again, it's a not sophisticated leadership structure. It's not reliant on one particular person where everybody takes their cues from, even if that person might be Bob Bradley. I do think that the thing that struck me, and I haven't been around a lot of professional sports teams, most of the sports that I've covered have been around individual people who are responsible for themselves and sort of leading their own way. But as a group structure, the communication and the openness with which that LAFC is constructed from the very beginning, I think you owe that to Bob Bradley in the way that he communicates, and also John Thorrington and the people in the front office. And there's nothing like earth-shattering about that, except it's not easy to do. People's egos get in the way. All sorts of things get in the way of that. Difficult to navigate and negotiate sometimes in locker rooms. And that's never, ever been an issue, it seems like, inside of LAFC. If there are personalities that are tough to manage, maybe they're not around anymore, and decisions are made pretty quickly. If you have people who aren't living up to the standard, I think that they set for themselves, they go. I mean, the guy that I think about first and foremost is like an Andre Horta, who didn't seem mature enough to able to police himself, to be a leader of himself, let alone for the group. Mm-hmm. And so my sense of it is that kind of accountability is evident from the get-go. I think Ryan would probably be more qualified to compare it to maybe other teams. He saw NYFC very close, and it depends coach to coach. The organization, the structure of what a team looks like is really reliant on the personality of the manager involved. I think more than almost any other sport, you see that in soccer. The collective sort of, I think, idea that the team has, that comes out on the field. And when they're sharp as a group, they're super tough to beat. And when they're not sharp, even in a piece or two, it can be much more difficult. So I think that sense of relying on the togetherness has made a huge difference for them, and feeling comfortable that even if we're down 1 or 2, maybe even 3, the game's not lost, because we can always go back and put pressure on teams by scoring goals. And that's kind of really what it comes down to. Overall, I think they are set up to win. They are set up to thrive in these sort of moments. Just have to do it. And we'll see in that quarterfinal match against Orlando City whether the sort of Seattle effect that we saw in last season's postseason takes effect, because I don't think there's any doubt that had LAFC beaten someone other than the Galaxy before that Seattle match, then their mentality would have been different heading into that match. I think there was such a release on the pressure valve that going into that Seattle playoff match really kind of had its own effect. You were dealing with a lot of factors. It wasn't simply hosting a conference championship game at home. Here, much different scenario, much different circumstances. So each level is sort of maturity, and we've seen them take that maturity and run with it And that's what I think you have to expect from them moving forward. That leadership style certainly translates all the way through.
Yeah, and I mean that's a great segue, I think, in thinking about this next game and Orlando. It's an interesting thing, right? You look at the remaining teams left, and on the surface, if you look over the course of the last years in MLS, or indeed in their whole history in MLS, I know Orlando was an incredible team in the lower divisions before they became an MLS club. I believe they won 3 out of the 4 seasons since their inception. Back when Adrian Heath, the current coach of Minnesota, was coaching Orlando City, and the likes of Dom Dwyer were playing in the lower leagues before he went to Kansas City and now back to Orlando. They thrived, and I believe they played at the Walt Disney World of Sports where they're currently playing. So it's almost like a home field situation for them. And obviously there's no purple masses in the stadium, but these players are in their natural environments. This is where they train. This is the weather that they know, the streets that they know. And some of these players, if they played for the USL team or had the personnel, this is their backyard. Ryan, you've been there. You've got to see it. I know you have family in Florida. How much do you think Orlando's home field factor exists, if at all, for this tournament, and whether it's going to be a difference in this game against LAFC? We're having just a little bit of technical difficulties with Ryan. We'll get back with him in a second. But Josh, Orlando's been one of the surprises of the tournament, something that a lot of people watching this tournament have sort of been amused and sort of enjoying the run of. But the truth is also that Orlando has a new coach, Oscar Pareja, who in his first year with Dallas definitely gave LAFC 2 hard games. One of them they won in Dallas. The second they drew at the Bank. He won the Supporters Shield with FC Dallas. He went down and coached in Tijuana, and then he came back to MLS with Orlando. And he's a veteran of this league. Seems to get the best out of his players. We know Walker Zimmerman played with him for a long time and spoke highly of him as a manager. This is an Orlando team who's never made the playoffs since their inception. After all those successes in the early years of their club's history, they've sort of become like the laughingstock of MLS, and especially for Atlanta United, who go down there and just mop them time and time again. But again, this is the tournament that they're hosting, and folks joked about it. I know Paul Tenorio, who I believe might have roots down there, he spoke about, what if Orlando can pull this off, right? What if Orlando could come back and win? And it's almost set up, of course, arguably the favorite of the tournament in LAFC, and Orlando, this hometown team kind of coming at each other. What do you expect from this game, and do you think that the magic that Orlando has had thus far in the tournament could help propel them past LAFC in this one?
Yeah, no, you get in a knockout stage format, anything's possible. Orlando's been quality through this tournament. I don't think there's any doubt about it. They have excellent player Nani, who seems to really sort of be the engine of that team. And it's not as simple a home field advantage if they get to sleep in their own beds, right? They're in the bubble. They're sort of playing under the circumstances that everybody else is. They can't go off midday afternoon snack to their favorite deli or whatever. They're sort of just stuck, and that's what they're dealing with. But they've played well. I think that they can give LAFC a match. I remember the Orlando coming to Los Angeles last year really kind of looked out of its depth against LAFC. We will see, reuniting with the João Moutinho, these sorts of things. But I think under Oscar Pereira, they've looked good. They've, from the outset of this tournament, they played in the very first game against Miami. They really have sort of taken the initiative, and I think it'd be a surprise if they beat LAFC. But LAFC can't be too far off their best game and walk out of this one with a win. I don't think not under knockout stage circumstances. Orlando's going to want to really excel in this tournament. Like you said, they are home. There's a lot of reason for them to want to excel, give the local community something to feel good about. But they have not run up against anybody like LAFC yet. I don't know if there is anyone like LAFC, but it seems like Orlando likes to play a little bit more open, likes to a little bit more back and forth, and that's a tough game to beat against. Tough style if you're playing and you've got to play against LAFC. They'll tend to run you off the field, and I wouldn't be surprised if that happened in this contest again.
Ryan, we were just talking a little bit about home field. Obviously, you're down there in Florida, and as I mentioned, have family there. Just maybe understand a little bit more about this team's role. And yeah, there's a part of this in your story mind that goes, well, shoot, like this team's never made the playoffs. They haven't given their fans, at least in the MLS era, much, if anything, to be excited about. They're constantly like a laughing stock of the league, and yet new manager in Oscar Pereira, who's always coached in MLS, as far as I know, really solid teams. You have the emergence of Chris Mueller, who's been a bubbling attacker in the league and has really seemed to come into his own in this tournament. LAFC obviously has some ties with Joao Moutinho and Mohamed El Munir swapping places now a couple of years ago. And and this one, Dom Dwyer is not available. But Oscar Pereira going into the match said, we've got to match LAFC's intensity in this, but they have to match our creativity. And I haven't watched Orlando enough to know, even in this tournament, I haven't watched them enough to know how creative they've been. But do you think that this is or has the potential to be one of those sort of like trap games, as they call them, for LAFC, where you defeat the bigger boss in the video game level before, and then you go to the little village and you're wandering through the path and you get like stabbed by some guy jumping out of the tree, in this case Orlando City?
Well, I think the danger in that scenario comes with the familiarity of the man in the tree with the forest that he's in. This is, Orlando's environment. I think LAFC have benefited from, what we've called, or what the media has called, teams giving up in the face of, the domineering offense. But, there's probably also some physical exhaustion that played factors for both Los Angeles and Seattle. I don't think that that's going to be as much of a phenomenon facing Orlando, and that's one of their biggest advantages going into this game. LAFC continue to adapt to this environment that they are familiar with, even if they're playing in the bubble and not, at home with their families, the way that hosting being the hometown team in a competition, the benefit usually afforded. But in terms of being on the field, I think that this is absolutely a potential trap game. Just Seattle is the new Galaxy. You wanted to beat them. The revenge factor is it can be a distracting factor for the victor, because as you move on, there's so much relevance and such a good feeling that you were able to close the previous chapter that sometimes you get bitten by the next one. And Orlando City certainly represent that threat because they played well in this tournament. I think that they were probably coming in feeling as much attention nationally as they've had since their inaugural season. They played the first match against Miami, and then their results caused them to stay in the media's conversation because, they're a good story. They're a Cinderella hometown team, and now they are, playing the role of David in this David versus Goliath matchup. But, you have to play the game, and LAFC is obviously the favorite team, but they have to go out there and they have to execute much closer to the way they did against Seattle than they did in the group stage. Otherwise, of course, they can be upset. That potential always exists when two teams step on a field together.
It's one of those things where on paper, this is a really imbalanced game. It's a game that LAFC, under normal circumstances, we'd normally expect them to win. But, just like Seattle had 4 days rest, and some people argued that was too much, 4 days extra rest on LAFC, Orlando does have 2 extra days. And Bob, when he spoke to the media, did say that he would at least have liked 1 more day for his players to get that full cycle of rest and recovery. And then Orlando, they're used to training in these weather conditions, right? One other thing that's sort of interesting is this one's a 4:30 kickoff on Pacific time, which is just earlier. And I know when LAFC left, they were talking about how they were going to organize their days. And it seemed to be that they liked having these later games because it was more like a West Coast schedule. this one now bumps it up a few hours. They're just these are small things, right? Like at the end of the day, they have to be competitive and they have to win games, but they are significant enough to make you wonder, like in the right circumstances, obviously in any knockout game, but especially in one with all these things, this could be a game for LAFC that they could put themselves in a bad position if they're not trying to match that same intensity they had against Seattle. Guys, yeah, it's a 4:30 kickoff this Friday evening, afternoon here in Los Angeles. It's a heat wave coming to LA. I think there's a tropical storm on the way to Florida right now. That's supposed to make landfall over the weekend. So I don't know. There's a storm of soccer. There's a storm of all kinds. I know COVID still very much on the minds of these two states. But any last words, boys, about what you expect from this quarterfinal and looking forward then to Orlando and LAFC?
Yeah, I'll just say, like, on the idea of a trap game, like you're in a tournament and a knockout stage is the quarterfinal. There shouldn't be anything as a trap game. Every game should be, if you are approaching it the right way, every game should be as intense as the one before it, and you shouldn't look ahead to the next one. So that would be a massive mistake. And I think considering what we've seen of LAFC sort of losing focus as they did against Seattle after that Galaxy match last year, if that happened again in this spot, it's something to think about and talk about. I would definitely not. I would be surprised if they didn't show up against Orlando and didn't play as intensely as they did against Seattle. It would be a mistake too. I know Latif Blessing likes to get ahead of himself. He's already saying we're going to win the tournament. The tournament is ours. Just learn lessons from previous times, and that's the thing that they can take away most. It's not you didn't avenge Seattle last year. Last year Seattle beat you, and then they won the MLS Cup. What you did was in this tournament beat Seattle. Now go on to the next one and take care of business. That's the best way to sort of get past these stumbles that they've had. So I think you have to expect that they will, and if they don't, then it's something that we can talk about in the coming weeks, because really that's the only way that Orlando, I think, can beat them is if LAFC doesn't show up at their best. That's just my last thought on this.
Ryan, I'm always going to give Latif Blessing the space to say whatever he wants because he plays harder than anyone I've ever seen. What do you have to say, Ryan? Any last things for people to look out for, or what you're looking forward to seeing with this one?
Same remedy.
Having a little technical difficulties with Ryan, but I know that he's going to be on site, our man on the ground, always covering for LA Daily News. You can read his stuff there. Ryan, Josh, and I will definitely get back to you guys next week, regardless of the outcome of this one. But yeah, we're looking forward to it. It's a 4:30 p.m. kickoff Pacific time. And for the Season Pass podcast, Josh Gross, Ryan Wallerson, I'm Alex Dwyer. In the morning, doing it for you guys live. Have a good weekend. Enjoy the match. Next stop, Orlando.